Hello everyone. This lecture right here is titled Race, the Middle Passage and the African Diaspora. This video lecture is a complimentary lecture to the PowerPoint lecture in the chapter 22 that deals with Africa and the Atlantic world. What we're dealing with, the subject matter we're dealing with right now is the Middle Passage, which is the African slave trade, and the creation of what is called the African Diaspora, and it takes place from the 1500s up to the 1800s. What we're also engaged in is the issue of race. Major question that we want to ask is pretty much what is the experience of Africans throughout in slavery, and what contribution have they given to the Americas. This picture right here is a man by the name of Orlando Equiano, also known as Gustavus Vassa. He is the first enslaved African to write and publish a book that details the enslavement of Africans aboard the slave boat through an African perspective. These, of course, are pictures of, this is a cartoon picture of an African being enslaved, a painting. And these two pictures right here, you can see right now, is a map of how Africans were mushroomed into the slave ship. We'll get into these a little later. Now, on to the next slide, we have to understand something. What is the significance of this chapter? What is the significance of the African slave trade and the African diaspora? Well, what is very significant is that we have to ask many questions. Why were Africans enslaved? What was used to justify their enslavement? What were their experiences in enslavement? Who benefited from slavery, of course, from the enslavement of Africans? And what is the African diaspora? And of course, when you look at this one, we were engaged in what's called the rise of European capitalism. And what is meant by European capitalism is that European nations have consumed a large amount of wealth from the African slave trade, both the French, the British, the Spanish, and the Portuguese, especially the British. We were also engaged in what was used for their enslavement. Well, one is race, ideology, and thought and culture. If you have taken a sociology course, they will tell you that racism is a social construct. But what they have not told you that racism is also a historical construct as well. And you'll be seeing race as an ideology in both thought and in culture to justify the enslavement of Africans. Then we will also engage in what is known as the African diaspora. What makes this diaspora different from all others is that it is the unforced migration of people of African descent outside of Africa into other parts of the globe. This one we're dealing with the Atlantic world, which is North America, South America, and of course the Caribbean. You have Africans who were enslaved in the British and European nations. You also had Africans who were enslaved in the Middle East. But this one we're dealing with the Americas, the Atlantic world. Okay. This is a map of the African diaspora. Now, as you can see right here, the enslavement of Africans has gone global. Okay, you're seeing right here, of course, this is enslavement of Africans. Now, this is not to say that Africans never held other African slavery. You have to understand that there are different ethnic groups and culture within Africa itself. And throughout world history, every nation that has conquered another nation have always held people in slavery, whether it's ancient China, ancient Mesopotamia, the ancient Romans, the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks. The Greeks had to slave each other. So you have this throughout. What you have differently is, first, the institution of slavery really begins right here in what is East Africa. And the reason why is because of what is now known as the Middle East or Western Asia. When Islam is formed in East Asia, you also have the creation of Swahili, and that is the merging of Arabic and East African culture. Well, with that also you have is called the enslavement of Africans. Africans they call a racial slur called the ET. ADB is what they call. And you were enslaved to the Middle East. This one is completely different because this one is mostly European capitalism. This one is part of, it's a part of European capitalism. This is the Atlantic slave trade. This means this. It has now gone global. And you begin to see that all this from West Africa, Senegambia, Sierra Leone, Western Coast, the majority of people are going to Brazil, going to the Caribbean, and going to what is now known as the United States. This is the African diaspora map. Okay? Now, of course, before that, they did have a history. This is a map of King Mali, of the Mali Empire. You had three empires, the Mali, the Ghana, the Mali, and the Songhai. These are also African Moors and West African. These are African Moors who were traders and who really helped to rebuild the European civilization known as Andalus, which is now known as southern France, Spain, and Portugal. Arab Muslims and African Moors. Moors mean black, and that's what it means, and they would actually help to rebuild the civilization in Europe. So when they helped rebuild the civilization in Europe, they always had access to West Africans. They are always known as West Africans. So, and yes, they were gold and they were trade. Well, there was their first contact with West Africans and their knowledge of West Africans. So that was the history of West Africa before the enslavement. I just have to show you that. But now here it is, race ideology. Why was racism important? And we have to understand what racism is. Racism is when one race is viewed as themselves as being superior, and they view another as inferior and feel that they should come out and dominate that so-called inferior race. So for them, Europeans begin to view Africans, they begin to view themselves as superior, and then they begin to view Africans as being inferior. And because they view Africans as inferior, they begin to use laws, use violence, use other different measures to attempt to dominate that particular group. Now, it doesn't mean that they use racial slurs and things like that nature is not a symbol of racism. That's prejudice. You can prejudge people, but it's not an act of racism because you have to demonstrate your power over a group. Now, the one excuse, and again, these are myths. The one excuse is the curse of Ham myth that evolved from the 1400 up to the 1700 BC. Now, this actually evolved from Jewish oral traditions back during the 1700 ADs. And what it said was that because Noah, and you look at the picture right here, Noah is saying naked by his son Ham. So Noah somewhat curses Ham, and then all of a sudden that he curses Ham, and all of a sudden that he's cursed with dark skin and everything. And ministers would use that to justify dark skin as being a curse. Like the Bible, that God is justifying the enslavement of Africans. Another one is called racial scientific racism. This is when scientists begin to construct this pseudo-scientific myths of measuring the craniums of blacks and trying to compare them to animals, where comparing Europeans to biblical figures like Christ. These are the excuses that are used to subjugate the races of Africans. Okay, and this is, of course, is a picture of the Middle Passage. These are the things that went on. Of course, you suffer from diseases, you were tortured, you were cut to death. If you had diseases, you were thrown overboard because you're now considered property. And this is how compact and stiff it is within the Middle Passage itself. Okay. Now, why enslave Africans? One is skin color. You can detect darker skin from lighter skin shades from Europeans. Okay, I mean, that's just true. Another one is geographical convenience of West Africa. West Africa was very convenient. If you have colonies in North and South America, it's very convenient to get the slaves from West Africa. Another one is European competition for power. And what that is that you have the French, the British, the Spanish, and the Portuguese competing for power over who controls what in North and South America and the seas. And another one is agricultural skills. For example, if the Dahomey nation in Africa is known for growing rice, then the British will specifically target the Dahomey for rice production skills, and they will give other African nations guns, everything, to fight the Dahomey to enslave them. Okay. And of course, this is the Middle Passage. This is another map that we want to give out. Again, 60% went to the West Indies, 35% went to South America. Brazil, to this very day, is the largest black community in the world. Okay. And of course, this is racial slavery. What created this? Well, what created racial slavery was the Fourth Crusades. In 1204, the Muslims actually conquered what was known as Constantinople. Now today we call it Istanbul. And what happens is that really Europeans were really also enslaving Russians, enslaving whites and Middle Easterners into slavery. That's what they wanted as slaves, but they couldn't do so. What happens is that, because again, the word slave is Russian for Slav. So what happens is that because of the conquering of Constantinople by the Muslims, it set the precedent for the Catholic Church to pass what's called a papal bull. And one is passed by Pope Nicholas V, who you see right here. This Pope Nicholas V, he passes his 1452 papal bull, and this is Calixtus III of 1456. And what he says is that, well, now you can go ahead and enslave Africans and sub-Saharan Africa, but no Muslims, because they don't want radicalism. What that has done is that you have marked Africans for slavery. You have now compared dark skin with being somehow not human. Now, in order to justify their enslavement, people of African descent cannot be viewed as human beings. They must be viewed as property, or, yeah, viewed as property. All right? And of course, this is very important because how did enslaved Africans respond? They are always just victims. They try to free themselves, but of course, you know, not everything happens. Some were actually, now, there are some slave revolts that were successful. The Amistad was successful. And of course, these took place by both men and women on the slave ships. Capitalism, industrial racism, this is very important because Africa never benefited from slavery. It was really the British who did. With slavery, you had capitalism and industrial revolution. You begin to have shipbuilding companies, shipping companies. You begin to have the creation of seaport towns, Liverpool and Manchester. You begin to have the rise of banks and insurance companies. So by looking at these things, you realize that, well, you know, this is right here is the crest of the Royal African Company. This right here is Liverpool and Manchester. So you really begin to see the wealth that comes out of enslaving Africans are more beneficial among the British. Africa never benefited from slavery. Matter of fact, it ruined their population. Okay. This, of course, is cash crops and slavery. This, of course, is plantation. This is tobacco. This is indigo. This is rice. These are rice fields. These are, you know, these are plantations. So this is the money that's being generated. Okay. And of course, this right here is the British triangular trade. This is what you see this is the triangular trade. This is what makes the British capitalism. You begin to see the making of sugar, slave, molasses, tobacco, etc., etc. And it's all works in a triangle. So this is how England gains its wealth. And of course, this is religion. This is the Africanization of the New World. This is what Africans are bringing to the Americas. And this is used as a form of survival and also as a form of cultural resistance. I mean, this is Candomblé in Brazil. The Catholicism that you see worshiped in Brazil is really Candomblé. This is the Orishas and the African deities inserted into what is called Christianity. Of course, there's the Obey in Jamaica, the Vundun or the Voodoo in Haiti. It's not what they say it is. Candomblé in Brazil, Santeria in Cuba, and the Gullah and the Sea Islands in South Carolina and Georgia. Okay, this concludes this video lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.